Hey everybody, this is your man Jim. Just sit back, relax, listen to me as I tell you a story. It'll be all about stories, mystery, horror, classical, even some poems. So please enjoy this. Hey everybody, this is your man Jim. Just sit back, relax, listen to me as I tell you a story. It'll be all about stories, mystery, horror, classical, even some poems. So please enjoy this. The Music on the Hill by SAKI. Sylvia Selton ate her breakfast in the morning room at Yesney with the pleasant sense of ultimate victory. Such a fervent Ironside might have permitted himself on the morrow of Worcester fight. He was scarcely pugnacious by temperament, but belonged to that more successful class of fighters who fate had willed that her life should be occupied with a series of small struggles, usually with the odds slightly against her, and usually she had just managed to come through winning. And now she felt that she had brought her hardest and certainly her most important struggle to the successful issue, to have married Mortimer Shelton, dead Mortimer, as all his more intimate enemies called him, in the teeth of the cold hostility of his family, and in spite of his unaffected and adroitness to carry through, as his more intimate enemies, in spite of his unaffected indifference to women, was indeed an achievement that had needed some determination and adroitness to carry through. Yesterday she had brought her victory to its concluding stage by wrenching her husband away from town and its group of satellite watering places farm, which was his country house. You will never get Mortimer to go, his mother said corporately, but if he once goes, he'll stay. Yesterday throws almost as much of a spell over him as town does. One can understand what holds him to town, but yesterday, and the dowager has shrugged her shoulders. There was a somber, almost savage wildness about yesterday that was certainly not like to appeal to town-bred taste, and Sylvia, notwithstanding her name, also accustomed to nothing more than silver, than leafy Kensington. She looked on the country as something excellent and wholesome in its way, which was apt to become troublesome if you encouraged it over much. Distrust of town life, which was apt to become troublesome if you encouraged it over much. Distrust of town life had been a new thing with her, born of her marriage, Mortimer, as she had watched with satisfaction gradual fading of what had closed in on them yesternight. Her willpower and strategy had prevailed. Mortimer would stay. Outside the morning room windows was a triangular slope of turf with the indulgent might call a lawn, and beyond its low hedge and neglected fuchsia bushes, a steeper slope, heather and bracken dropped down into cavernous combs over, overgrown with oak and yew. In its wild, open savagery there seemed a stealthy link of the joy of life with the terror of unseen things. Sylvia smiled complacently as she gazed with the school of art appreciation at the landscape. And then, all of a sudden, she almost shuddered. "It is very wild," she said to Mortimer, who had joined her. One could almost think that in such a place the worship of Pan had never quite died out. "The worship of Pan never has died out," said Mortimer. "Other newer gods have drawn aside the votaries from time to time, but he is a nature god to whom all must come back at last. He has been called the father of all the gods, but most of his children have been stillborn." Sylvia was religious in an honest, vaguely devotional kind of way, and did not like to hear her beliefs spoken of as mere aftergrowths, but it was at least something new and hopeful to hear Dan Mortimer speak with such energy and conviction on any subject. "You don't really believe in pants?" she asked critically. "I've been a fool in most things," said Mortimer, "but I'm not such a fool as not to believe in Pan when I'm down here. And if you're wise, you won't disbelieve in him too, boastfully, while you're in his country." It was not till a week later that Sylvia had exhausted the attractions of the woodland walks around Yesney that she ventured on a tour of inspection of the farm buildings. A farmyard suggested in her mind a scene of cheerful bustle, turns and flails, and smiling dairymaids, and teams of horses drinking knee-deep in duck-crowded ponds. As she wandered around the gray buildings of Yes Manor Farm, her first impression was one of the crushing stillness and desolation, as though she had happened on the same lone deserted homestead, long given over to owls and cobwebs. Then came a sense of future combs and coppice from behind heavy doors and shuttered windows. Came the restless stamp of hoof or rasp of chain halter, and at times a muffled bellow some stalled beast. From a distant Comer, a shaggy dog, watched her with intent, unfriendly eyes as she drew near it, slipped quietly into its kennel, and slipped out again as noisily as she had passed by. A few hens, questing for food under a rick, stole away under a gate at her approach. Sylvia felt that if she had come across any human beings in the wilderness of barn and brae, they would have fled wrath late from her gaze. At last, turning a corner for the enormous sow, gigantic beyond the townswoman's wildest computation of swine, Sylvia's turned to make an unobstructed retreat as she threaded her way past rickyards and a boy's laughter, golden and unequivocal. Jan, the only boy employed on the farm, a toe nearest hillside, and Mortimer, who questioned, knew of no other possible begetter of the hidden mockery that had ambushed Sylvia's retreat. The memory of that untraceable echo added to her other impression of a furtive, sinister something that hung around yesterday. Of Mortimer, she saw very little. Farm and woods and trout streams seemed to swallow him up from dawn till dusk. Once, following the directions she had seen him take in the center of which stood a stone pedestal, surmounted by a small bronze figure of a youthful Pan. There was a beautiful piece of workmanship, but her attention was chiefly held by the fact that a newly cut bunch of grapes had been placed as an offering at its feet. Grapes were none too plentiful at the manor house, and Sylvia snatched the bunch angrily, slowly homeward, and then gave away to a sharp feeling of something that was very near. Contemptuous annoyance dominated her thoughts as she strode slowly homeward, and then gave way to a sharp feeling of something that was very near and beautiful, unutterably evil eyes. It was a lonely pathway, all pathways round. Yesterday's scrutiny to the sudden apparition. It was not till she had reached the house that she discovered that she had dropped the bunch of grapes in her flight. I saw a youth in the wood today, she told Mortimer that evening, brown-faced and rather handsome, but a scoundrel to look at. A gypsy lad, I suppose. A reasonable theory, said Mortimer, but there aren't any gypsies in these parts at present. Then who was he? Asked Sylvia, and as Mortimer appeared to have no theory of his own, she passed on to recount her finding of the votive offering. I suppose it was your doing, she observed. It's a harmless piece of lunacy, but people would think you dreadfully silly if they knew of it. Did you meddle with it in any way? Asked Mortimer. I threw the grapes away. It seemed so silly, said Sylvia, watching Mortimer's impassive face for a sign of annoyance. I don't think you are wise to do that, he said affectionately. I've heard it said that the wood gods are rather horrible to those who molest them. Horrible, perhaps, to those that believe in them, but you see, I don't, retorted Sylvia. All the same, said Mortimer, in his even, dispassionate tone, I should avoid the woods and orchards if I were you, and give a wide berth to the horned beast of the farm. It was all nonsense, of course, but in that lonely wood-girt spots, nonsense seemed able to rear a bastard brood of uneasiness. Mortimer, said Sylvia suddenly, I think we will go back to town sometime soon. Her victory has not been so complete as she had supposed. They had carried her onto ground that she was already anxious to quit. I don't think you will ever go back to town, said Mortimer. They seemed to be paraphrasing his mother's prediction as to himself. Sylvia noted with dissatisfaction and some self-contempt that the course, but in that lonely wood-girt spot, nonsense seemed able to rear. Sylvia noted with dissatisfaction and some self-contempt that the course of her next afternoon's ramble took her instinctively clear of the network of woods. As to the horned cattle, Mortimer's warning was scarcely needed, for she always regarded them as of doubtful neutrality at the best. Her imagination unsexed the most matronly dairy cows, turned them into bulls liable to see red at any moment. The ram who fed in the narrow paddock below the orchards, she had adjudged some ample and cautious probation to be a docile tipper. Today, however, she decided to leave his docility untested, for the unusually tranquil beast was roaming with every sign of restlessness from corner to corner of the meadow, a low, fitful piping, as if some reedy flute was coming from the depth of a neighboring copse. That there seemed to be some subtle connection between the animal's restless pacing and the wild music clad slopes that stretched in rolling shoulders high above Yesney. She had left the piping kind of music. She had left the piping notes behind her, but across the wooded combs at her feet, the wind brought her another kind of music, the straining bay of hounds in full chase. Yesney was just on the outskirts of the Devon and Somerset country, and the hunted deer sometimes came that way. Sylvia could presently see a dark body breasting hill after hill and sinking again and again out of sight as he crossed the combs, while behind him steadily swelled that relentless chorus as he grew tense with the excited sympathy that one feels for any hunted thing, and whose capture one is not directly instead. And at last he spoke through the outermost well-furnished head. His obvious course was to drop down to the brown pools of the sea. Sylvia's surprise, however, he turned his back to the upless slope and came lumbering resolutely onward over the heather. It will be dreadful, she thought. The hounds will put him down under my very eyes. But the music of the pack seemed to have died away for a moment, and in its place he heard again that wild piping, which rose now on the side, now on that, as though urging the failing stag to a final effort. Sylvia stood well aside from his path, half hidden in a thick growth of bushes, and watched him swing stiffly upwards, his flanks dark with sweat, the coarse hair on his neck showing light by contrast. The pipe music shrilled suddenly around her, seeming to come from the bushes at her very feet, and at the same moment the great beast slewed around and bore directly down upon her. In an instant her pity for the hunted animal was changed to wild terror at her own danger. The thick heather roots mocked her scrambling efforts at flight as she looked frantically downward for a glimpse of oncoming hounds. The huge antler spikes were within a few yards of her, and in a flash of numbing fear, she remembered Mortimer's warning to beware of horned beasts on the farm. And then, with a quick throb of joy, she saw that she was not alone. A human figure stood a few paces aside, knee deep in the bushes. "Drive it off!" she shrieked, but the figure made no answering movement. The antlers thrown straight at her breast, the acrid smell of the hunted animal was in her nostrils, but her eyes were filled with the horror of something she saw other than her oncoming death, and in the ears rang the echo of a boy's laughter, golden and equivocal. And that's gonna be it for this story. Um, that was a pretty good story. The title was "The Music on the Hill" by SAKI. SAKI's the author. Hope y'all have a good one, and I'll see you on the next one.